Hey dreamers, tonight we set sail into the Celtic mists, where the horizon melts away and the world drifts into legend. As the sea fades into sky, a boat appears without oars, gliding silently over silver waves. At its helm stands a figure draped in a cloak of ever-shifting colours, Manannán mac Lir, son of the sea, guardian of the Celtic Otherworld and weaver of mysteries older than memory. But what secrets does Manannán keep in his enchanted cloak, and how did he become the keeper of paradise where no sorrow lingers? Why did the greatest heroes and kings seek his counsel, and what bargains did mortals risk to cross his realm of illusion? What ancient magic lets his boat sail without wind, carrying lost souls and chosen guests alike into islands that appear and vanish with the mist? Let these questions carry you as we drift into tales wrapped in wonder, from the dawn of Irish gods to the twilight where old beliefs met new faith. If these stories truly help you relax, feel free to leave a gentle like. If you'd like, you're welcome to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you now. Tonight, you're among fellow dreamers. Welcome to the shifting shores of myth. Manannán mac Lir, even his name carries the rhythm of waves against ancient stone. Mac Lir means son of Lir, the primordial ocean that once embraced every shore of Ireland and stretched beyond the world's edge. But Manannán was far more than just the son of water and wave. He represented every boundary and possibility, the shimmering mist between the everyday and the forever, the promise that any voyage might lead somewhere extraordinary. To truly understand Manannán, you need to see how he wore many faces, answered to many names, and wandered the world in countless forms. It makes sense, doesn't it, for a god whose greatest joy was testing what mortals believed possible? In the oldest genealogies, some called him Oisín or Orbson, linking his story to the very origins of the land. The battle where he fell, long ago near what became Lough Corrib, gave the lake its name from his own, yet the tales insist he didn't stay dead long. Gods, as legends remind us, rarely remain lost to history. Manannán rose again, or maybe he never truly left, claiming the name Manannán from the mysterious Isle of Man. Or perhaps, as some claim, the isle itself took its name from him, for he became its first ruler, sheltering it in drifting mists and illusions that would protect his people from the eyes of any invader. On the Isle of Man, you'd hear him called Manannán beg mac Lir, little Manannán, son of the sea. On Midsummer Eve, the people offered bundles of rushes and meadow grasses at Warfield, now known as South Beryl, a humble tribute for their magical guardian. In return, Manannán wrapped their island in enchanted fog, turning a single century into visions of 1,000, or conjuring fleets of boats out of sedges and mist to send Viking attackers fleeing in confusion. The Manx people understood something vital. Magic is often a matter of what you're willing to see and believe. But long before he guarded man's shores, Manannán strode among the Tuatha de Danann at the height of their glory, when Ireland was wild and full of wonders you might struggle to imagine. He owned treasures that reshaped legends, objects so powerful heroes risked all to claim them, and kings struck bargains for a chance to possess them. But here is the secret. These treasures were not trophies to be hoarded, but pieces on a cosmic chessboard. We will soon discover why Manannán so often gave his most powerful items away, and how each gift was a calculated move to shape the destiny of Ireland itself. But to understand this grand strategy, we must first meet the players and see the pieces on the board. Let us now look at these wonders, and their true purpose will become clear as their stories unfold. First and foremost was Fragarac, a sword whose name meant the answerer or the retaliator, depending on which ancient scribe you asked and what mood they were in when translating. This was no ordinary blade that merely cut flesh and bone. Fragarac could slice through any armour ever forged, pierce any shield ever raised, and the wounds it dealt were always, without exception, fatal. Even the smallest scratch from its edge would drain the strength from a warrior, reducing them to the weakness of a woman in childbirth. A comparison that says more about ancient Irish attitudes than it does about actual childbirth, I might add, but there it is. More than this, Fragarac held power over truth itself. If you held this sword to someone's throat, they could not tell a lie. The truth would pour from their lips whether they willed it or not, compelled by the blade's enchantment. Imagine the conversations you could have with such a tool at your disposal. Imagine the secrets you would learn. Imagine, too, how quickly you would run out of friends. Manannán understood this, and he did not keep Fragarac for himself alone. When his foster son Lugh needed weapons to fight the monstrous Fomorians, Manannán lent him this very sword, along with much else besides. The god of the sea owned a horse named Aonbar, which meant one dapple or flowing mane, depending on which translation catches your fancy. This was a steed unlike any earthly mount, for Aonbar could gallop across the surface of the ocean as easily as across green meadows, her hooves striking the waves as though they were solid ground. Atop this magical mare, Manannán would ride from his island kingdoms to island and back, his cloak billowing behind him, appearing to mortals as a mysterious horseman materializing from sea mist and vanishing just as quickly. He lent Aonbar to Lugh as well, for Manannán was generous with his treasures when the cause was just, though he made it clear such loans came with expectations. For those times when a horse would not do, even a magical one, Manannán had a boat called Squaba Tween, which translates to wave sweeper. This curragh, a traditional Irish boat, needed no oars and no sails. You simply had to tell it where you wished to go, and it would take you there, navigating by some magic known only to itself and its master. The sons of Twirian once borrowed this boat on a quest, and it carried them across seas and to impossible islands where the sun shone differently and time moved at its own strange pace. Wave sweeper was how Manannán travelled when he wished to carry others with him, when the journey required thought and conversation rather than the speed of a galloping horse. Honestly, which magical item from mythology would you most want to own? For me, it has to be the self-navigating boat. The idea of travelling anywhere without having to worry about directions or getting lost, just speaking your destination and arriving there. That is a traveller's dream. Though I suppose Fragarac's ability to compel truth would make certain modern political debates considerably shorter, wouldn't it? Then there was his cloak, and what a cloak it was! Woven from mist and starlight and the gods only know what else, this garment could shift through every colour imaginable. One moment it might shimmer like the deep ocean at noon, blue-green and gold, touched. The next it would be silver like moonlight on water, or purple like the pre-dawn sky, or the grey of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. More than beauty, the cloak granted power. Wrapped within its folds, Manannán could become invisible, passing unseen among mortals or gods as he pleased. But its greatest magic, the magic that would echo through the ages in story after story, was the magic of forgetting. When Manannán shook this cloak between two people, they would forget each other completely, as though they had never met. No memory would remain, no longing, no love, no hate. Just absence where connection had been. It was a mercy and a cruelty at once, the kind of gift a god gives when there is no other solution to be found. We will hear more of this later, when we speak of Chu Chulainn and the woman he could not keep. Manannán kept his treasures in a bag made from crane skin, a corbolg that was itself magical. This bag had once been a woman named Aoife, daughter of Dealbouth, who had been transformed into a crane by a jealous rival in love. The spell was to last 200 years, and Aoife lived out those centuries in bird form before finally dying. Manannán, ever resourceful in the way gods can be when tragedy strikes, crafted her skin into this treasure bag. The bag could only be opened at high tide, when the ocean's power was strongest. At low tide, it appeared empty, revealing nothing of the wonders it contained. Inside were the bones of Assel's pig, the belt and smith hook of Gwaibniu the smith god, the helmet of the king of Lochlin, and many other items whose meanings are now lost to time. Speaking of pigs, Manannán owned a herd of magical swine that provided perhaps his most practical treasure. Each day, these pigs could be slaughtered and eaten, providing succulent meat for feasting. Each night, they would regenerate whole and alive again, ready to be slaughtered the next day. An endless supply of food from a finite herd, the kind of miracle that would make modern economists weep with frustration as it defies every rule of scarcity they hold dear. These pigs provided sustenance for the Tuatha De Danann when they retreated from the world of mortals. Manannán also held the Feast of Gwaibniu, a magical banquet where all who ate would be granted eternal youth. Between the regenerating swine and the youth-granting feast, the god of the sea ensured his people would never know hunger or aging, gifts perhaps more precious than any sword or boat. The most powerful gift Manannán gave his people was not an object at all, but rather an enchantment woven from his own essence. This was the faith fiada, the mist of invisibility, a shroud that cloaked the dwellings of the Tuatha De Danann after their defeat. When you walked through the Irish countryside, you might pass by a green hill that seemed like any other, never knowing that beneath it lay a palace of the ancient gods, hidden behind Manannán's mist. The veil between worlds was his to control, the boundary between seen and unseen his to draw. In many ways, this was his truest power. Not the sword that cut or the horse that ran, but the ability to hide what should not be found and reveal what needed to be seen. Among his treasures were also a silver branch bearing golden apples and a goblet of truth, but these deserve their own stories, for they feature in two of the greatest tales ever told about Manannán's interactions with mortal kings. We will come to those soon enough. For now, let us turn to the realms themselves, the kingdoms beyond the western sea where Manannán ruled as king and where the old magic still held full sway. When the Celts spoke of the Otherworld, they did not mean a single place, but rather many places, realms that overlapped and interpenetrated, each with its own character and rules. Manannán ruled over several of these, or perhaps he ruled over one realm known by many names, depending on who was telling the story and what aspect of paradise they wished to emphasize. Imain Ablach was the Isle of Apple Trees, where fruit hung perpetually ripe on silver boughs, where swans glided across crystal waters, and where yew trees stood in sacred groves. This was the place where Lugh was fostered as a child, learning the arts of war and magic that would make him the champion of the Tuatha De Danann. Here Manannán made his primary dwelling, in a city called Clúthín na Cuan, surrounded by walls that shimmered with enchantment. The apples of Imain Ablach were not merely food, but symbols of divine knowledge, golden fruit that granted wisdom to those permitted to taste them. Some scholars believe this realm was the origin of Avalon, that island in Arthurian legend where mortally wounded King Arthur was taken to be healed. The connection makes a certain sense, for both are apple islands, both are ruled by magical beings, both exist in that space between myth and geography that the Celts understood so well. Mag Mell, the Plain of Delights, was another name for Manannán's realm, or perhaps another realm entirely. Here, joy was the only law, beauty the only currency, and time itself behaved differently than in the mortal world. When Manannán spoke to Bran the Voyager, he described the sea as appearing to him as Mag Mell, a flowery plain where horses ran that could not be seen unless the veil was lifted. To the god, the ocean was not water at all, but rather a meadow in eternal bloom, a pastoral paradise where the normal rules of existence did not apply. The woman who sang to Cu Chulainn and Liban called him to Mag Mell to fight a battle, and there the wounded hero found healing and, briefly, love. Tir Tairngire, the Land of Promise, was yet another realm under Manannán's dominion. Here dwelt no sickness, no old age, no death, no decay, and no falsehood. It was a place of perfect truth, which must have been exhausting for anyone visiting who was used to the comfortable lies mortals tell themselves and each other every day. High King Cormac MacAird visited Tir Tairngire, as we will hear, and found there wonders beyond description. But promises, even in the Land of Promise, come with conditions. Tir Na Na, the Land of Youth, overlapped with these other realms, or perhaps contained them all within itself. This was the destination of heroes and chosen mortals who caught the eye of the otherworldly women who came sometimes to Ireland, seeking champions or companions, or simply someone who might appreciate eternity. Oisín, the poet-warrior son of Finn mac Cumhail, rode to Tir na Nog on a white horse with the beautiful Neem of the golden hair, who happened to be Manannán's daughter. There Oisín lived for what seemed like 3 years, though centuries passed in Ireland. When he returned and touched Irish soil, those centuries crashed down upon him in an instant, and he crumbled to dust. The old tale offers a warning about the otherworld that the Celts understood well. You cannot go to paradise and return unchanged. Time moves differently there, and those who cross between the worlds must pay a price. Finally, there was Tir Fortuin, the land under waves. This realm's name suggests a place beneath the ocean, and indeed, in the story of the pursuit of the Gila de Care, the Fianna found themselves chasing Manannán to this underwater kingdom. Yet when they arrived, they found not a drowned land, but rather a beautiful country with forests and plains, castles and armies, all existing in some pocket dimension accessible only to those the god permitted to enter. Geography worked differently in the otherworld, you see. A place could be beneath the waves and yet be filled with air and light. A journey might take 3 days or 300 years. Distance meant nothing, and time was more a suggestion than a rule. These realms could be reached in several ways, each as strange as the destination. Some mortals sailed west across the ocean for 3 days, following the path of the setting sun. The honey road, the Celts called it, that golden track of light the sun leaves on the water as it sinks toward the horizon. If you followed it far enough, with the right guide or the right invitation, you would come eventually to the Blessed Isles. Others entered through cave mouths or burial mounds, descending into the hollow hills where the Tuatha De Danann dwelt, and finding passages that led deeper still, beyond earth and stone to the green lands beyond. Still others might simply encounter the right mist at the right time, walk forward and find themselves elsewhere, the mortal world left behind like a dream forgotten upon waking. Manannán controlled access to all these places. He could grant permission to enter or bar the way absolutely. His horse could carry travellers there. His boat could navigate the supernatural seas between worlds. Without his consent, or at least without his neglect, mortals could not reach the otherworld at all. He was the ferryman, the gatekeeper, the guard at the threshold. A useful position for a god who enjoyed testing mortals to see if they were worthy of what they sought. But how did Manannán come to hold such power? To answer that, we must speak of war and defeat, of the end of one age and the beginning of another. The Tuatha De Danann had ruled Ireland for an age, defeating first the Firbolg and then the monstrous Fomorians in battles of legendary scope. But the wheel turns, as it always does, and new invaders came across the sea. These were the Milesians, the sons of Mil, who sailed from the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula to claim Ireland as their own. They were humans, or perhaps the first humans truly worthy of the name, depending on how you interpret the myth. They did not possess the magic of the Tuatha De Danann, but they had courage and determination and the favour of fate. The Milesians encountered 3 goddesses of the Tuatha De Danann as they made their way inland, Eriu, Banba, and Fodla, each of whom asked that the island be named after her. Eriu's request was granted, and from her name comes Ayr, modern Ireland. The goddess's 3 husbands, Macquill, Macchecht, and Macgreen, were the kings of the Tuatha De Danann at that time. They asked for a truce of 3 days, requesting that the Milesians anchor their ships 9 waves distance from shore during this time. The Milesians agreed because the ancient Irish had laws of hospitality and honour that even invaders respected. But the Tuatha De Danann, desperate to save their kingdom, created a magical storm to drive the invaders away. The winds howled, the waves rose like mountains, and the Milesian fleet was scattered across the wild Atlantic. It seemed the gods would triumph through sorcery, what they might not through combat, a tactic that has a certain practicality to it, even if it does lack sporting spirit. However, the Milesians had a poet named Immersion, and poets in ancient Ireland wielded power that went far beyond pretty words. Immersion calmed the sea with his verse, speaking to the storm in words of such beauty and authority that even magically conjured winds had no choice but to subside. The Milesians made landfall, and battle was joined at Tailtew. The fighting was fierce, and many died on both sides, but in the end, the Tuatha De Danann were defeated. Not destroyed, mind you, but beaten, their kings slain, their armies scattered, their claim to the surface of Ireland broken. When Emergen the poet was called upon to divide the land between the victors and the vanquished, he made a decision that demonstrated either great wisdom or great cruelty, depending on your perspective. He allotted the portion of Ireland above ground to the Milesians and the portion below ground to the Tuatha De Danann. It was at this moment that Manannán stepped forward and took control. The Dagda had been the chief of the gods, but the age of the Dagda was ending. Bodbed Derg, another son of the Dagda, was chosen as king of the defeated Tuatha De Danann, but Manannán assumed the role of over-king, the administrator who would manage the practical details of this new underground existence. In the tale called Altram Tiger da Medar, the fosterage of the houses of two milk vessels preserved in the ancient Book of Fermoy, we are told exactly what Manannán did. He counselled the Tuatha De Danann to spread themselves throughout the Soothe, the fairy mounds that dotted Ireland's landscape. These were the ancient burial mounds, the Neolithic monuments that the earlier peoples had built, empty now, or full only of old bones and silence. Manannán saw what they could become, sacred spaces hollowed out beneath the green hills, transformed through magic into palaces as grand as any that had stood above ground. He went through Ireland and assigned each of the noble families of the Tuatha De Danann to their own Soothe. To Bodbed Derg, the new king, he gave Sid Boidbed on the shores of Lufderg. To Midhir he gave Bree Leith. To Lear, son of Lufhaid, he assigned Sid Fionachide. The Dagda received the great complex at Brú na Bóin, though his clever son Angus would later trick him out of it through wordplay, because gods appreciate a good scam as much as anyone. To each of the nobles, Manannán distributed a dwelling place, ensuring that the defeated gods would have homes in this new age, even if those homes must remain hidden from mortal eyes. But hiding the seed was not enough. Manannán had to ensure that mortals would not simply stumble into these places by accident, opening doors to a world that was no longer meant for them. So he wove the greatest enchantment of his long life, the Feth Fiada, the mist of invisibility. This shroud he spread over all the dwellings of the Tuatha De Danann, and over his own realms as well. When mortals looked at a Soothe, they would see only a green hill, nothing more. When they approached the Isle of Man, they would see only fog and empty water. The veil between worlds would hold firm unless deliberately parted. To sustain his people in their exile, Manannán arranged the Feast of Gwaedniu, Fledegoibnian, a magical banquet that would grant eternal youth to all who partook of it. His regenerating swine would provide the meat, and the ale of Gwydion the smith god would ensure that those who drank it would never age or sicken. The Tuatha De Danann would persist beneath the hills, immortal and invisible, the ancient gods transformed into the Awas Sea, the fairy folk, remembered in stories but no longer walking openly in daylight. His work complete, Manannán departed Ireland. Some stories say he retreated to the Isle of Man, others that he went to Emain Ablach, his island paradise beyond the western horizon. But he did not abandon his people entirely. Throughout the ages that followed, he would return from time to time, appearing in disguise to test heroes or aid those he favoured. The sea remained his domain, and those who sailed upon it might still catch a glimpse of his chariot riding the waves, or hear in the crash of surf against stone the echo of his laughter. Before we continue with Manannán's adventures among mortals, let us speak of the foster son who became the greatest hero of the Tuatha De Danann, the warrior who would use Manannán's own weapons to save his people in their darkest hour. Let us speak of Lugh, called Lumfada, of the long arm or long throw, master of all arts, champion against the Fomorians. Lugh was born of a union between the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians, those monstrous beings who represented chaos and destruction. His mother was Ethniu, daughter of the terrible Balor, he of the evil eye whose gaze could kill entire armies. His father was Cian of the Tuatha De Danann, who had loved the Fomorian princess despite the enmity between their peoples. When Lugh was born, Cian knew the child would be in danger, for both sides of the conflict would see in him a threat or a tool. So Cian did what desperate fathers do in myths. He sought protection from one more powerful than himself. He brought the infant Lugh to Manannán mac Lir. Manannán took the child to Eman Ablach, that island of eternal youth beyond the western sea, and there he raised Lugh as his own foster son. In Irish tradition, foster bonds were as sacred as blood bonds, sometimes even more so, for you chose your foster kin deliberately. Manannán trained the boy in all the arts of war and magic, in poetry and music, in wisdom and trickery. Lugh grew strong in that place where time moved strangely, and when he was ready, when the Tuatha De Danann faced their greatest peril, Manannán sent him back to Ireland with gifts beyond price. The Second Battle of Mag Tuired was approaching, the climactic confrontation between the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians. The Fomorians demanded tribute from the gods, oppressive taxes that drained the wealth and dignity of the Tuatha De Danann. Their champion was Balor of the Evil Eye, who could kill with a glance, whose terrible gaze had to be lifted by attendants using hooks and pulleys because his eyelid had grown so heavy with the weight of the poison contained within. Against such a foe, ordinary weapons would not suffice. Manannán equipped Lugh with his own panoply of war. First, the sword Fragarak, the Answerer, that blade which could cut through any armour and whose wounds were always fatal. Lugh girt himself with this weapon, feeling its weight and its hunger for battle. Next came the helmet, called Cathbar or perhaps Senbihar, depending on the manuscript. This helm was set with 2 precious gems in the front and 1 in the rear, and it protected Lugh's head from any blow. The body armour, the luiresh, and the neck-piece or breastplate, the scabal, completed his defensive equipment, ensuring that no Fomorian weapon could pierce his flesh. Most important of all was Manannán's cloak. When Lugh wore this garment, he could not be injured. Blades turned aside from it, spells failed to penetrate it, arrows fell harmlessly away. It was armour of the gods, proof against mortality itself. Finally, Lugh would ride Aon Bar, the magical horse who could gallop across land or sea with equal ease, carrying her rider faster than any mortal steed could match. Thus armed and mounted, Lugh returned to Ireland and presented himself to the court of Nuada, the king of the Tuatha De Danann, who had been restored to his throne after receiving a silver hand to replace the one he had lost in the first battle of Mag Tuired. The guards at Tara challenged Lugh, asking what skill he possessed that would grant him entry, for only those with unique abilities were permitted to join Nuada's court. Lugh named skill after skill. He was a smith, a physician, a warrior, a poet, a historian, a sorcerer, and on and on. Each time the guards replied that they already had someone with that skill. Finally, Lugh asked if they had anyone who possessed all these skills together. They did not, of course. No one possessed all skills, which was rather the point. Lugh was admitted and took his place as champion of the Tuatha De Danann. The battle, when it came, was fierce beyond description. Armies clashed, magic raged like wildfire, heroes fell on both sides, but the moment that decided everything came when Lugh faced his grandfather Balor across the field of slaughter. The old Fomorian king called for his attendants to lift his eyelid, intending to annihilate his grandson with a single gaze. But Lugh, moving with speed granted by Aon Bar and precision learned from Manannán's training, cast a stone from his sling. Some say it was just a stone, others that it was a special projectile called a taflum, made from the blood of toads, bears, lions and vipers mixed with sand from the Red Sea, a concoction so toxic that the very description of it seems designed to make you feel vaguely ill. Regardless of what it was made from, Lugh's stone flew true, striking Balor's eye just as it opened, driving the poison eye back through his skull and out the other side, killing the terrible champion. With Balor's death, the battle turned. The Fomorians fled, and the Tuatha De Danann won a victory that would echo through all the ages of their reign. And Lugh, who had been a child fostered far from Ireland, became Lugh Lamfada, hero king, wielder of the lightning spear, the many-skilled god who saved his people. But he did it with Manannán's sword at his side, Manannán's armour on his body, Manannán's cloak protecting him from harm. The victory belonged to many, but perhaps most of all to the sea god who had raised a half-Fomorian child and transformed him into the greatest champion of the gods. Honestly, which mythological mentor would you most want to learn from? For me, it has to be someone like Manannán. The combination of combat training, magical knowledge, and life skills learned in a paradise where you never age, that is an education beyond price. Plus, he clearly believed in the value of good equipment, which any practical adventurer can appreciate. The bond between Manannán and Lugh never broke. In later ages, when Lugh needed Manannán's boat or horse, they were granted, though sometimes with the caveat that Manannán could not loan what was itself a loan. Foster bonds ran deep in Irish tradition, deeper even than blood sometimes, and the connection between these two gods exemplified that truth. Manannán had given Lugh the tools he needed, quite literally, to become legendary. But Manannán's interactions with mortals were not always so grand or so noble. Sometimes, in fact, they were decidedly mysterious, tinged with melancholy and magic in equal measure, as we see in one of the earliest tales that features him. Let us speak now of Bran MacFeeble and the voyage that would take him beyond the western edge of the world. One day, near his stronghold, Bran walked alone when he heard music behind him. The melody was unlike anything he had ever known, sweet and hypnotic, pulling at something deep in his soul. Every time he turned to see who played it, the music moved, staying always just behind him where he could not quite glimpse its source. Finally, exhausted, lulled by the impossible beauty of the sound, Bran fell asleep on the grass. When he woke, the music had stopped, but beside him lay a silver branch bearing 3 golden apples. The apples chimed softly as he picked up the branch, a gentle musical sound that was the fading echo of the melody that had led him here. As Bran marveled at this impossible object, a woman appeared before him, a woman whose beauty suggested she came from no mortal realm. She spoke to him in verse, describing a land across the western sea where sorrow, old age, sickness, and death were unknown, a place of eternal youth and beauty called Emain Ablach, the Isle of Apple Trees. The woman's song described a paradise that made the mortal world seem drab by comparison. She spoke of plains covered with flowers, of rivers running with honey, of music that played without instruments, of warriors and fair women living in harmony and joy. She urged Bran to set sail across the ocean, telling him he was destined to reach this otherworldly land. Then, as mysteriously as she had appeared, she vanished, and the silver branch vanished with her, springing from Bran's hand back to hers, though he tried to hold it fast. Bran, deeply moved by what he had seen and heard, gathered 3 companies of 9 warriors each, 27 men who would trust him enough to sail into the unknown. They built their boats, traditional currachs made of leather stretched over wooden frames, and set out westward across the grey Atlantic. For 2 days and 2 nights they sailed, seeing nothing but water and sky in all directions, the coast of Ireland long vanished behind them, no land visible ahead. On the 3rd day, as doubt must have been creeping into even the most stalwart hearts, they saw something impossible approaching them. A figure rode toward them across the surface of the sea in a chariot pulled by magnificent horses, and the chariot's wheels did not sink into the water but rolled across the waves as though they were solid ground. As this vision drew closer, Bran and his men could see the rider clearly, a man of divine bearing whose very presence suggested power and authority beyond the mortal ken. The rider introduced himself as Manannán mac Lir, and he sang to Bran 30 verses that revealed the true nature of reality as the gods perceived it. What appeared to Bran as a vast, empty ocean, Manannán explained, was to his eyes a flowery plain called Mag Mell, the Plain of Delights. The sea itself was not water to Manannán, but rather a meadow bursting with colour and life, where horses ran unseen beneath the hulls of Bran's boats, where trees bore fruit in the depths, where all was beauty and abundance if you only had eyes to perceive it correctly. Manannán went on to prophesy Bran's future and the future of his descendants. He spoke of a son who would be born from him, Mongan Macfiashnai, though this birth would not happen for many generations and would involve circumstances we will explore later. The god told Bran he would reach his destination by sundown, offered blessings for his journey, and then rode away across the waves, his chariot disappearing into the sea mist from which he had emerged. The encounter is brief in the telling but profound in its implications. Manannán revealed to Bran something the Celts understood deeply. Reality is not the same for everyone who experiences it. What one being sees as water, another perceives as land. The boundary between what is real and what is illusion is far more permeable than we usually acknowledge, and crossing between worlds might be as simple as learning to see differently. This is the magic at the heart of the Otherworld, you see. Not flashy spells or dramatic transformations, but a fundamental shift in perception that reveals what was always there, hidden only by our assumptions about how things must be. True to Manannán's words, Bran and his men reached the Isle of Joy as the sun was setting. From their boats, they could see people on the shore, laughing and staring, their faces full of mirth but their voices silent. Bran sent one of his men to investigate, but the moment the man stepped onto the island, he began laughing just like the others, gaping and giggling, completely ignoring the calls of his companions. No matter how much Bran and the others shouted, the man would not return to the boat, would not even acknowledge them. He had been caught by whatever enchantment or joy bound that island, lost to a happiness so complete it erased everything else. Reluctantly, Bran sailed on, leaving his companion behind. A lesson learned, perhaps, that not all otherworldly places are safe, and that pleasure itself can be a trap as final as any prison. The next island they reached was different. Here, the leader of the land, a woman of supernatural beauty, cast a magical ball of yarn toward Bran's boat. It stuck to his hand, and no matter how he struggled, he could not release it. The woman pulled the boat to shore using the thread, demonstrating a strength that belied her graceful appearance. She welcomed Bran and his men to the land of women, and each man was paired with a woman of this realm. There were 3 times 9 beds in the great house they were brought to, couches of extraordinary comfort. Food and drink appeared that never ran out, every delicacy they could desire, every form of rest and pleasure. Time passed strangely in this place. What felt to Bran and his men like a year was actually much longer, though they did not realize this. Eventually, one of the men, Necton McColbrain, began to feel homesickness rising in his heart. He longed to see Ireland again, to walk familiar shores, to hear his native tongue spoken by ordinary people. The longing grew until it became unbearable, and he convinced Bran and the others that they should return home. The leader of the Land of Women warned them not to go. She cautioned that they must not touch the soil of Ireland under any circumstances. They could visit, she said, they could speak to people from their boats, but they must not set foot on land. Bran, still hoping to retrieve the man they had left on the Isle of Joy, agreed to these terms, and they set sail back across the sea. When they reached Ireland and approached the shore, people gathered to see who was arriving. Bran called out his name, announcing himself as Bran MacFeeble, but the people on the shore looked confused. "We know no one by that name," they called back, though the voyage of Bran is in our ancient stories. You see, what had seemed like perhaps a year in the Land of Women had actually been centuries in Ireland. Bran and his companions had become legends, their names preserved only in the oldest tales, their living memories long since passed from the world. Necton, desperate to return home despite the warning, could not restrain himself. He leapt from the boat onto the shore of Ireland, and the moment his feet touched the ground, centuries crashed down upon him. His body crumbled to dust instantly, as though he had been buried for hundreds of years, which, in a sense, he had been, only he had been living those years elsewhere, in a place where time had no claim on him. Horrified, Bran understood the warning at last. He and his men could never return to Ireland, never walk its soil, never truly come home. From their boats, they told the assembled people their tale, speaking of the Silver Branch, the meeting with Manannán, the Isle of Joy, the land of women, all of it. Then they sailed away westward into the sunset and were never seen again. Some say they still sail the seas between worlds, eternally voyaging, unable to land, unable to die. Others believe they found another island, another paradise, and live there still in endless youth. But they did not come back to Ireland, and their fate remains a mystery. The Voyage of Bran teaches us several truths about Manannán and his realms. First, that time operates by different rules in the Otherworld, and those who go there should not expect to find the world unchanged when they return, if they return at all. Second, that the god of the sea can appear anywhere on the ocean, riding his chariot, offering cryptic knowledge to those voyaging into mystery. Third, that the Otherworld is beautiful and terrible, paradise and trap, a place of such wonder that it can make you forget your very self. Fourth, that Manannán's role is not to prevent people from seeking these places, but rather to warn them of the consequences, to reveal what they are truly choosing when they follow a silver branch west into the unknown. He is not cruel, but neither is he sentimental about mortal attachments to home and time and mortality. In another age, another mortal king would journey to Manannán's realm, though his path would be different and his encounter more direct. Let us speak now of Cormac mac Air, the High King of Tara, and his adventure in the Land of Promise. Cormac was one of the greatest of Ireland's high kings, renowned for his wisdom and his just laws. One day, a stranger appeared at Tara bearing a silver branch with 3 golden apples. When the stranger shook the branch, it produced music so beautiful, so soothing, that it could lull anyone who heard it into peaceful sleep, could heal the sick and comfort the grieving. Cormac, recognizing the value of such an object, desired it greatly. The stranger offered to trade the branch for 3 wishes, 3 requests that Cormac would have to grant at a later time. The king agreed, thinking he could surely afford to grant 3 reasonable requests in exchange for such a treasure. The branch changed hands, the stranger departed, and Cormac possessed the magical silver branch, thinking himself clever for making such a trade. A year passed. Then the stranger returned for his first wish. He asked for Cormac's daughter. The king was shocked, but he had given his word, and ancient Irish law bound even kings to keep their oaths. His daughter was handed over to the stranger and taken away. Cormac's household mourned, his wife wept, but when the king shook the silver branch, its music soothed their grief and brought them peace. A troubling sort of consolation when you think about it. Magic that makes you forget why you should be angry. The stranger came back for his second wish. This time he asked for Cormac's son. Again, despite the anguish this caused, the oath had to be honoured. The boy was given to the stranger and vanished from Tara. Again, the silver branch's music calmed the household's sorrow. When the stranger appeared a third time, Cormac knew what was coming and dreaded it. The man asked for Cormac's wife, Aithne. This was the final straw. Cormac had given his daughter and his son, but to give away his wife, to be left with nothing but a musical branch, this was too much. Oath or no oath, the king could not bear it. When the stranger left with Aithne, Cormac pursued him across the countryside, rage driving him forward. The chase led through forests and over hills, the stranger always just ahead, until suddenly a thick fog descended. Cormac lost sight of the man he was pursuing and found himself alone in a mist so dense he could barely see his own hands. He wandered for what seemed like hours, all sense of direction lost, until finally the fog began to clear. When visibility returned, Cormac found himself in a land unlike any he had seen before. He stood before a grand fortress surrounded by walls of silver and bronze. Within the walls he could see a fountain with 5 streams flowing from it, salmon leaping in the crystal waters. The place radiated an otherworldly beauty that made it clear he was no longer in Ireland, no longer in the mortal world at all. A man emerged from the fortress, greeting Cormac with warmth and hospitality. He led the king inside to a great hall where another man sat and a pig was being prepared for cooking. The host explained that this particular pig had a peculiar property. It could only be roasted properly if a true story were told for each of its quarters. One truth would cook 1 quarter, another truth another quarter, and so forth. The host told a true story, and 1 quarter of the pig cooked perfectly. Another man told a true story, and a second quarter cooked. Cormac, catching on to the pattern, told his own true story, how his wife and children had been taken from him by a stranger with a silver branch, how he had pursued the thief across Ireland and lost him in a magical fog, how he found himself now in this strange place. As he spoke, the 3rd quarter cooked. But who would tell the 4th story? The pig was now 3 quarters cooked, and the host suggested they eat. But Cormac, still following the royal protocols even in this bizarre situation, protested that he could not dine unless he had 50 companions with him, as was the custom for a high king. The host smiled and began to sing a lullaby so soothing that Cormac fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When the king woke, he found himself surrounded by 50 warriors, and his wife and children stood before him, restored to him whole and unharmed. Joy flooded through him, but before he could embrace them, the host raised his hand and spoke. The man revealed his true identity. He was Manannán mac Lir, god of the sea, lord of the Otherworld. The stranger who had taken Cormac's family had been Manannán in disguise. All of this, the trade, the taking, the pursuit, the mysterious journey, had been orchestrated by the god to bring Cormac to Tir Tairngire, the land of promise which was Manannán's kingdom. Why? Why engineer such an elaborate deception? Because, Manannán explained, Cormac was a worthy king, and there were truths he needed to learn and gifts he needed to receive that could only be given here, in this place beyond the mortal world. The god had tested Cormac's word, his honour, his love for his family, his ability to maintain protocols even in the strangest circumstances. The king had passed every test. Manannán gave Cormac 2 gifts to take back to Ireland. The first was the silver branch itself, which the king could keep for the rest of his life to bring peace and healing to his realm. The second was a golden cup, a goblet with remarkable properties. If 3 lies were told over this cup, it would shatter into pieces. If 3 truths were then spoken over it, the cup would heal itself, becoming whole again. This was the goblet of truth, a tool for justice, a way to discern honesty in a world full of deception. Manannán allowed Cormac and his family to return to Ireland with these treasures, but he gave one warning: the gifts were for Cormac's lifetime only. After the king's death, the silver branch and the goblet would vanish, returning to the otherworld from which they came. This condition was honoured. Cormac used the cup throughout his reign to determine truth from lies in legal disputes, becoming known as one of the wisest and most just of all Irish kings. When he died, the magical items disappeared, and they were never seen in Ireland again. The story of Cormac's adventure reveals another aspect of Manannán's character. He is a teacher, yes, but his teaching methods involve deception, manipulation, and what we might call emotional torture, if we are being honest about it. Taking a man's children and wife to test his honour? That is some Old Testament level moral examination right there, and not everyone would consider it fair play. But Manannán operates by otherworldly rules, and by those rules Cormac was honoured, not harmed. He received gifts of immense value, learned truths about himself and about justice, and returned to the mortal world better equipped to rule. The ends justified the means from Manannán's perspective, though one suspects Cormac's wife and children might have preferred a less traumatic teaching method. Not all of Manannán's interventions in mortal affairs were so ultimately benevolent, however. Let us speak now of a darker tale, one that involves the greatest hero of Ulster, a doomed love affair, and the cloak of forgetfulness that separated two people who should never have met in the first place. The story begins with Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster, the warrior who single-handedly defended his province against the armies of Queen Medb, who killed hundreds of men in battle before he could legally be called an adult, whose rage in combat transformed him into a twisted, monstrous killing machine that terrified enemies and allies alike. This was a man who knew only war and glory, whose life was a series of battles and victories, whose very existence seemed to anger the gods with its intensity and power. One day, Cú Chulainn and other warriors were hunting birds by the water, gathering them as gifts for their wives. Each man brought down 2 birds for his wife to wear as decorations on her shoulders, but by the time all the women were provided for, Cú Chulainn's wife Emer had none. The hero promised her he would kill the most beautiful birds he saw for her, but when those birds appeared, they were unlike any earthly creatures. 2 seabirds flew overhead, linked by a golden chain, singing a song so magical that it lulled those who heard it into enchanted sleep. Emer, whose wisdom often exceeded her husband's, recognized these as birds from the otherworld and warned Cú Chulainn not to attack them. But the hero, proud and stubborn and determined to keep his word to his wife, threw his weapons at the birds anyway. He struck one of them, damaging a wing but not killing the creature. Then everything went wrong. Cú Chulainn fell suddenly, mysteriously ill, collapsing beside a standing stone. In his fevered dreams, 2 women appeared and beat him with horsewhips until he was barely alive. When he finally woke from these visions, he remained sick, feverish and weak, unable to rise from his bed. This was unprecedented. Cú Chulainn, who had never been defeated in battle, who had fought armies single-handedly, was laid low by an illness no physician could cure. For nearly a year he lay in this wasting sickness, and no one knew what to do. Then one of the women from his dream appeared to him in waking life. She was Lugh, and she revealed the truth. The birds had been herself and her sister Fand in transformed shape. Cú Chulainn had attacked beings from the otherworld, and the beating in his dreams had been their retaliation. But Lugh had not come merely to explain, she had come with an offer. If Cú Chulainn would travel to Mag Mell, the Plain of Delights, and help Fand defeat her enemies in battle there, Fand would heal him of his sickness. Cú Chulainn, pride wounded along with his body, refused at first. But his charioteer Lugh agreed to go and investigate. Lugh travelled to the otherworld and returned with descriptions of its beauty and reports of the battle that needed fighting. Emer, Cú Chulainn's wife, finally convinced the hero to go, berating him for choosing pride over health, for lying in bed when he could be healed, and fighting as he was meant to do. Cú Chulainn went to Mag Mell. There he fought alongside Fand, winning the battle and helping her defeat her foes. In gratitude, Fand offered to sleep with him, and Cú Chulainn accepted. The two began an affair, the warrior and the otherworldly woman, both beautiful and fierce, both accustomed to getting what they wanted. But word of the affair reached Emer. The wife who had defended her husband, who had convinced him to go to Mag Mell for healing, now found herself betrayed. She gathered a troop of women armed with knives and went to confront the lovers, determined to fight if necessary to reclaim her husband. When Fand saw Emer approaching, armed and furious, and accompanied by warrior women, she recognized the situation for what it was. Emer loved Cú Chulainn truly, had stood by him through everything, and deserved his loyalty. Fand, for all her beauty and power, was the interloper, the otherworldly temptation that had no rightful claim. She decided to return to her husband, Manannán MacLír. But here is where the story turns truly heartbreaking. Both Cuchulainn and Fand were devastated by the separation. The warrior, who had never been defeated, found himself defeated by love and duty. Fand, who had thought she could claim this mortal hero for herself, realized some bonds could not be broken even by the otherworld's magic. They stood apart, hearts breaking, unable to choose between love and honor. Manannán mac Lir appeared then, the husband who had been wronged, the god who had every right to be angry. But he did not rage or punish. Instead, he performed an act of terrible mercy. He took his magical cloak, that garment which could shift through every colour, which granted invisibility and forgetfulness, and he shook it between Fand and Cuchulainn. The moment the cloak was shaken, both of them forgot. The memories vanished as though they had never existed. Fand forgot Cuchulainn completely, every moment they had shared, every word they had spoken, every touch exchanged. Cuchulainn forgot Fand just as thoroughly. The love that had torn them both apart simply ceased to exist, erased by Manannán's magic. The druids gave Cuchulainn and Emer a potion of forgetfulness as well, ensuring that they too would not remember the affair or the pain it had caused. Everyone forgot, and life continued as though nothing had happened. This is perhaps the most purely melancholy of all Manannán's interventions. He solves the problem, yes. The love triangle collapses, no one has to live with the pain of impossible choices. Fand returns to her rightful place, and Emer keeps her husband. But at what cost? The erasure of memory, the deletion of experience, even painful experience, is a kind of violence. Those moments happened. That love existed. To simply wipe it away as though it never was, treating memory as something that can be edited like a manuscript, strikes at the heart of what makes us who we are. Yet Manannán saw no other solution, and perhaps he was right. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is help them forget. Sometimes the weight of memory is too much to bear, and living without those particular ghosts is the only way to continue living at all. The cloak of forgetfulness is mercy and cruelty woven together, like so much of what the god of the sea does. He is not good or evil, but rather something more complex, operating by rules that seem arbitrary to mortal minds, but follow their own deep logic in the realm of the divine. Which mythological artifact would you find hardest to live with? For me, it is the cloak of forgetfulness. The ability to erase memories sounds tempting when you are in pain, but the older I get, the more I realize that even painful memories are part of who we are. To lose them would be to lose yourself, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a stranger wearing your face. Give me Fragarak any day. At least a sword's effects are straightforward. Manannán's interventions were not always about grand heroes and tragic love. Sometimes his actions shaped history in subtler ways, particularly through the children he fostered or fathered. Let us speak now of Manannán mac Fiachnai, a figure who blurs the line between history and myth, between mortal and divine. Fiachnai mac Bayatan was a real historical figure, king of the Ulaid in the late 6th century. According to the annals, he died in 626. But legend transformed him into something more, connecting him to the otherworldly through his son Manannán. The story goes that Fiachnai was at war with the Scots, and the battle was going poorly. A mysterious warrior appeared before him, offering victory in exchange for a rather specific price. The warrior wanted to spend one night with Fiachnai's wife. The king, desperate to win the battle and save his people, agreed to this strange bargain. The warrior kept his part of the deal. Fiachnai won his battle against the Scots, claiming a victory that seemed impossible. When he returned home, the mysterious warrior came to collect payment. He spent one night with the queen, and 9 months later she gave birth to a son they named Manannán. The warrior revealed his true identity. He was Manannán mac Lir. Manannán was thus born of both mortal and divine parentage, a child who bridged the worlds. When Manannán was 3 nights old, an age when human infants can barely focus their eyes, Manannán came and took him away to the Otherworld to be raised, just as he had taken Lugh long before. In the Otherworld, time moved strangely. Manannán grew and learned, studying with Manannán and gaining knowledge that no mortal should possess. When he finally returned to Ireland as a young man, he demonstrated abilities that seemed impossible. He knew the true history of Ireland's past, could correct the greatest poets when they made mistakes in their recitations, and claimed to remember events from centuries before his birth. Some stories suggest that Manannán was actually Finn mac Cumhaill, the legendary hero, reincarnated. The doctrine of rebirth was part of ancient Celtic belief, the idea that souls could return in new bodies, carrying knowledge from previous lives. Whether Manannán was truly Finn reborn or simply had access to supernatural knowledge from his time in the Otherworld remains ambiguous in the tales. But his wisdom, his magical abilities, and his strange detachment from normal human concerns all marked him as someone who had walked between worlds and carried both realms within him. This tale of Manannán's birth was actually foretold generations earlier. Remember when Manannán met Bran the Voyager riding across the sea? In that encounter, Manannán prophesied that a great son would be born from him, Manannán mac Fiachnai, though that birth was still centuries away from the time of speaking. Gods see time differently, you see. Past, present, and future blend together for them in ways that make prophecy less prediction and more simple statement of fact. Manannán's story reminds us that Manannán's influence extended across generations, that his actions rippled through time in ways mortals could barely comprehend. By taking these children to raise in the Otherworld, by mixing divine blood with mortal, by ensuring that knowledge from one age passed into another, Manannán shaped Irish history as surely as any battle or law. But not all of Manannán's time in the mortal world was spent fostering heroes or conducting God's business. Sometimes, it seems, he simply enjoyed himself, playing tricks on humans and testing their reactions to the strange and unexpected. In these tales, we see Manannán as the trickster, the shapeshifter, the god who delighted in chaos for its own sake. One of his favourite disguises was the Gile de Care, the troublesome servant or bad servant. In this form, he appeared as a hulking, clumsy-seeming peasant who was anything but what he appeared. The most famous tale of the Gile de Care involves Finn mac Cumhaill and the Fianna, Ireland's legendary band of warriors. Finn and his men were hunting in the forests of Ballochgowan in Munster on Samhain, that liminal time when the veil between worlds grew thin. A huge, ugly man appeared leading a gaunt, wretched-looking horse. The giant was dressed in ragged clothes, carried a weapon, and identified himself as the Gile de Care. He claimed to be Fomorian, one of the ancient enemy race, seeking employment as a horseman. Finn, amused or curious, agreed to hire him and allowed him to release his horse to graze with the Fianna's mounts. The moment the Gile's horse was freed, it went wild, attacking and killing all the other horses. The Fianna were outraged, and Finn ordered Conan MacMorna to mount the Gile's horse and ride it to death as punishment. Conan leapt onto the horse, but no matter how he kicked or whipped, the creature would not move. 13 more of the Fianna climbed on, thinking their combined weight would somehow force the horse into motion. Still, it stood immobile. Then the Gile announced he was leaving, having been treated with contempt and frivolity. He strode away with incredible speed, moving like wind over a mountain, and the moment he was out of sight, his horse took off after him with all 14 Fianna on its back, galloping across Ireland and into the sea, carrying its unwilling riders to a distant island. Finn and the remaining Fianna pursued, receiving magical assistance from the Tuatha De Danann in the form of self-building ships. They sailed for 3 days until they reached an island with sheer cliffs. Dermot, who had been fostered by Manannán and taught by Angus, vaulted up the impossible cliff using his training and found himself in a beautiful land with forests, streams, and birdsong. There Dermot encountered a wizard who challenged him to combat, and they fought for 3 days, the wizard always escaping down a well. Finally, Dermot followed him down and found himself in a completely different realm, Tir Forthuin, the land under waves, where he met another wizard who explained the whole situation. The Gila de Care was actually Abatash, son of none other than Manannán MacLear himself, and all of this had been a test, a challenge, an entertainment for the god and his son. When Finn and the Fianna finally arrived after their own adventures, Abatash offered to make amends by letting 14 women ride his horse back to Ireland along with his own wife, mirroring how the 14 warriors had ridden the horse to his realm. An elegant solution, really, the kind of symmetry that gods and storytellers both appreciate. This tale is pure Manannán at his trickiest. He orchestrates an elaborate scenario that tests the Fianna's courage, loyalty, and problem-solving abilities, separates them across impossible distances, forces them into trials in the otherworld, and then resolves everything with a flourish that leaves no one truly harmed, but everyone thoroughly unsettled. The message seems to be, do not trust appearances, do not assume you understand what is happening, and if something seems too strange to be coincidence, it probably is because a god is messing with you. In another collection of tales called O'Donnell's Cairn, Manannán travels through Ireland in the guise of a lowly serving man, visiting the courts of various historical 16th century Irish lords. He wears thinly striped clothing and waterlogged leather shoes, carries scorched holly javelins, and generally looks like someone who has had a very hard life and makes poor fashion choices. At Black Hugh O'Donnell's home in Ballyshannon, Manannán challenges the court musicians to a competition and plays the harp so beautifully that his music can put anyone to sleep and heal the suffering. When O'Donnell tries to hire him and even trap him to prevent his departure, Manannán plays a different strain of music that causes O'Donnell's men to attack each other with axes, slaughtering themselves. As Manannán leaves, he rubs a magic herb on the dead men's gums that revives them, demanding cattle and land as payment for the restoration. He appears at other courts as a healer, curing a man's broken leg and blood poisoning with herbs. He serves as a military advisor, killing enemies with perfect archery. He performs conjuring tricks, making things disappear and reappear, pulling characters from bags who climb threads into clouds. Each time he demonstrates abilities far beyond what a mere servant should possess, and each time he leaves abruptly when slighted, vanishing before anyone can stop him. Only at the very end of these tales is the Cairn revealed to be Manannán MacLear, and by then he has tested the hospitality, honour and character of all these lords, found most of them wanting, extracted tribute or inflicted consequences, and departed back to wherever gods go when they tire of mortal company. These trickster tales serve several purposes. They entertain, obviously. There is something satisfying about watching a god in disguise test mortals and expose their flaws. But they also teach important lessons. Treat strangers well, for you never know who they might be. Honour your commitments. Do not be stingy with gifts. Respect those who seem beneath you. These are values the Irish held sacred, and Manannán's trickster stories reinforced them through the ultimate threat. Fail to uphold these values, and a god might punish you in ways both creative and devastating. The stories also reveal a fundamental truth about Manannán's nature. He is not confined to his ocean realm or his otherworldly kingdoms. He can and does walk among mortals whenever he pleases, wearing whatever face suits his purpose. The boundary between the divine and mundane is permeable for him in ways it is not for humans, and he exploits this freely, keeping the mortal world on edge, never quite sure if the stranger at the door might be something more. We have spoken much of Manannán's deeds, but what of his connection to the Isle of Man itself, that piece of land that bears his name and where his legend remained strongest, even as Christianity spread across the Celtic world? The Isle of Man rises from the sea between Ireland and Britain, a place of mists and mountains, of ancient burial mounds and standing stones. The Manx people knew Manannán as Manannán Beg Macwai Lair, Little Manannán Son of the Sea, though there was nothing little about his importance to them. Tradition held that he was the island's first ruler, a king who protected his people through magic rather than armies. Each year on Midsummer Eve, the Manx would perform a ritual called paying the rent. They would gather bundles of rushes and meadow grasses, green offerings from the land, and bring them to South Barrule, leaving them there as tribute to Manannán. This was not mere superstition, but rather a continuation of ancient practice, a covenant between people and protector god that lasted for centuries after Christianity had officially replaced the old religion. In exchange for these humble offerings, Manannán wrapped the island in protective mists. When invaders approached, whether Viking raiders or other enemies, they would find themselves sailing into fog so thick they could see nothing, hear only strange sounds, and lose all sense of direction. By the time the mist cleared, they would be far from their intended target, having missed the island entirely without ever knowing it was there. Manannán's magic made the Isle of Man effectively invisible when necessary, and no fleet, no matter how powerful, could conquer what it could not find. The Manx tell other stories of their guardian god. He could make one soldier on the battlements appear as 1,000, creating illusions that terrified invaders into retreat. He crafted boats from rushes and reeds that looked like a mighty fleet, sending enemies fleeing from imagined armadas. His presence protected the island not through violence but through confusion and concealment, the same qualities he used to hide the Sidhe mounds in Ireland. The symbol of the Isle of Man is the triskelion, 3 armoured legs joined at the thigh, bent at the knee, spinning in a wheel-like formation. This symbol is said to represent Manannán himself, the god who could travel at impossible speeds, who moved like a thundering wheel across land and sea, whose 3 legs carried him anywhere he wished to go. The image captures his essential nature, motion, transformation, the boundary between stability and chaos. As Christianity spread, the stories changed but did not entirely disappear. Manannán became a figure in folklore rather than worship. But the Manx still remembered him, still told his tales, still sometimes left offerings, even if they would not admit to doing so. The island bears his name to this day, and in that name his presence persists, a reminder that some gods are too deeply rooted in the land to be fully erased by new religions or new ages. Speaking of Christianity's arrival, let us turn to those later tales where Manannán encounters the saints who would transform Ireland, particularly St. Patrick himself. In County Monaghan, oral folklore preserves many stories of conflicts between Manannán and St. Patrick. These tales follow a familiar pattern. The god attempts to best the saint through magic and illusion, and the saint responds with the power of the Christian god, ultimately triumphing. But even in defeat, Manannán remains a figure of power and, occasionally, pathos. In one story, Manannán invites Patrick to his castle for a feast, but a servant warns the saint that the food is poisoned. Patrick turns Manannán into a giant eel or salmon and traps him in a bottle, sending the god to the bottom of a lake to guard his treasure until the end of time. In another, Manannán covers the land in darkness using his magic, but Patrick plants his crozier in the ground, prays, and dispels the darkness. A well springs from where the crozier touched earth, and that well, called Tobar Lazar, becomes a holy site. Other tales speak of Manannán's treasure, great chests of gold guarded by serpents in the depths of lakes. Villagers attempt to drain the lakes to claim the treasure, but Manannán always thwarts them, appearing on a white horse to send them on errands, and while they are gone, rocks appear to block their digging, or the channels they dug fill with silt overnight. The treasure remains protected, guarded by the god who will not relinquish his hoards even to Christianity. In stories from Donegal, Manannán encounters Saint Colum Cille. A servant of the saint breaks a golden chalice and meets Manannán, who repairs it with his breath, making it whole again through magic. The servant asks Colum Cille what Manannán should be told as thanks, and the saint replies that Manannán is bound for hell for his sorcery. When Manannán hears this, he becomes enraged and declares he will provide no more help to the Irish until they are as weak as water. He retreats then to the Highlands of Scotland, abandoning Ireland to its new god and new faith. These Christian-era tales transform Manannán from a beneficent protector to a demonic figure, an obstacle to salvation, an enemy to be defeated. Yet even in these diminished stories, his power remains evident. He must be specifically defeated by saints wielding divine authority. He cannot be ignored or dismissed, but must be confronted and banished. His treasures remain guarded, his magic functional, his presence still felt even in retreat. The Irish people who told these stories, recently converted but still remembering the old ways, seem to have struggled with what to do with Manannán. He was too important, too deeply embedded in their cultural memory to simply forget. So they recast him as a fallen figure, a relic of a pagan past that must be overcome but also, perhaps, mourned. There is sadness in these tales, a recognition that something valuable was lost when the old gods retreated, even if the new faith promised salvation. Before we conclude, let us speak briefly of Manannán's family, for even gods do not exist in isolation, and his relationships reveal much about his character. His wife Fand we have already discussed, that beautiful goddess whose name meant Pearl of Beauty, or perhaps Teardrop, whose love for Cuchulainn led to heartbreak and enforced forgetting. Some sources say Manannán was married instead to Oisín, a goddess associated with sovereignty and the sun, though Oisín is elsewhere described as his daughter rather than his wife. The confusion is typical of Irish mythology, where relationships shift depending on which manuscript you read and which region's traditions you follow. Manannán definitely had daughters, though. Niamh of the golden hair, who took Oisín to Tir na nG and gave him 3 years that were actually 3 centuries, was Manannán's child. Cleodna, another daughter, features in Tales from Munster. Some traditions name Aine as a daughter as well, giving Manannán a connection to sovereignty and kingship through his offspring. His foster children perhaps mattered more to the myths than his blood children. Lugh we have discussed extensively. Manannán also fostered Dermot, who appears in the pursuit of the Gila de Care using skills learned in the Otherworld. The god took in the children of heroes and raised them in paradise, training them to be more than mortal, sending them back to Ireland as bridges between worlds. His father Lugh gives Manannán his surname, Mac Lugh, meaning son of Lugh, yet Lugh himself remains a mysterious figure in the myths. His name simply means sea, suggesting he was a personification of the ocean itself, a primordial force more than a personality. Manannán inherited the sea from his father and made it his own, adding character and complexity to what Lugh represented as pure elemental power. The relationships Manannán formed, whether as husband, father, or foster parent, all followed a similar pattern. He gave generously to those he cared for, offering gifts, training, protection, and access to wonders beyond mortal imagination. But he also maintained boundaries, made it clear that his gifts came with expectations, and did not hesitate to take back what he had given if circumstances required it. His love was real but never quite unconditional, always tinged with the understanding that he operated by rules different from mortal ones. And so we come to the end of our journey through the stories of Manannán mac Lir, though his story has no true ending, for gods persist in ways that transcend narrative closure. We have sailed with Bran across impossible seas, learned truth from Cormac in the Land of Promise, watched Lugh wield divine weapons in battle, witnessed Cuchulainn's heart broken and then mercifully erased. We have seen Manannán as warrior, king, trickster, teacher, father, and guardian. He remains one of the most complex figures in all of Celtic mythology, a god who cannot be easily categorized. He is generous and manipulative, protective and dangerous, a giver of gifts who always expects payment. He hides his people from the new world while teaching select heroes how to bridge the old ways and the new. He rules paradise but frequently visits the mortal realm in disguise, testing, teaching, occasionally tormenting. More than anything, Manannán represents the boundary itself, the liminal space where one thing becomes another, the shore where sea meets land, the mist where visible becomes invisible, the moment between waking and dreaming, between mortal and divine, between one age and the next. He is the god of transitions, of transformations, of the places and moments where reality proves more flexible than we usually admit. His cloak shifts through all colours because he himself contains all possibilities. His boat needs no oars because direction is meaningless to one who can reshape space itself. His sword compels truth because he understands that reality and perception are often at odds, and sometimes the only way to find what is real is to force it into the open with magical steel. The mist he wrapped around Ireland's fairy mounds still exists in a sense, not literally perhaps, but metaphorically. There are still places in Ireland where the veil feels thin, where ancient monuments stand silent and strange, where something in the atmosphere suggests that what you see is not all there is to see. Manannán's legacy persists in that feeling, in that reminder that the world holds more mystery than our rational modern minds like to acknowledge. His stories teach us that paradise comes with a price, that forgetting can be mercy, that the sea recognizes no master except itself and its gods, that time is more fluid than calendars suggest, that strangers should be treated with respect because you never know who they might be, that love between worlds rarely ends well, that even the greatest heroes need teachers and protectors, that magic is real if you know where to look and how to see. Perhaps most importantly, Manannán reminds us that the old gods do not die. They retreat, they transform, they become stories, but they do not vanish. Somewhere beyond the western horizon, beyond the mists that gather at dawn and sunset, the realms of Emon Eblach and Tir Nanog and Magmel still exist, and Manannán still rules there. His cloak still shifts through impossible colors, his horse still gallops across the waves, his sword still compels truth from those who would hide behind lies. The sea remains, eternal and restless, and somewhere in its depths, or perhaps just beneath its surface, in that space where water meets air and both become something else entirely, the son of the sea watches and waits. Should you sail west from Ireland on the right day, following the honey road of the setting sun, listening to music that comes from behind you where you cannot quite see its source, you might find yourself approaching those blessed islands. Or you might find yourself lost in mist, turned around, arriving back where you started with no memory of how you got there, and a strange silver branch in your hand that you cannot quite recall finding. Either way, you will have encountered Manannán, the guardian of mysteries, the king of the otherworld, the god who holds the keys to paradise and offers them only to those who prove themselves worthy through trials they did not know they were taking. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, perhaps you will dream of waves that are actually flowers, of horses that run on water, of cloaks that shift through every color imaginable, of music so beautiful it makes you forget your own name. Perhaps you will dream of a figure riding towards you across the sea, coming to offer gifts or tests, or simply to remind you that the world contains more than what you can see, that magic persists at the edges of vision, that the gods have not gone away but merely stepped behind a curtain of mist, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to follow them into the unknown. Let us slip deeper now, drifting quietly as a boat on midnight tides into the profound mysteries of Manannán the son of the sea. We have spoken of his deeds, his treasures, his trickery, and his trials. But tonight, dreamers, let us press gently toward the true nature of who and what he is. The simple truth is that Manannán does not belong to the world in any ordinary sense. He is the son of Lugh. Yet Lugh is not just any parent. Lugh is the sea, the infinite, rolling threshold that has always marked the edge of all human knowing. When the first Celts looked out beyond the green horizons of their island, they saw not just water, but a vast, glimmering mirror. That mirror separated their own fleeting lives from the endless lands of spirit, dream, and possibility. The sea marked where reality blurred into legend. It was not an obstacle, but a portal. always moving, never to be fully crossed by mortal effort alone. To be called Mac Lir was not to simply inherit a kingdom or a crown. It was to be born from the eternal dance of boundary and transformation. Manannán embodies that liminality in every act and appearance. He is sometimes calm as a moonlit bay, sometimes wild as a winter squall, always present wherever boundaries are crossed. The ancient Irish did not imagine the sea as a realm to be conquered, ruled by a being who hurled tridents and summoned storms out of spite. That was the vision of the Greek Poseidon, a god of dominion and ego. To call Manannán the Celtic Poseidon misses the point spectacularly, though you must admit, equating any god to another is a pastime as old as comparative mythology itself. The Celts saw the sea as origin, as mother and mystery, as the paradoxical source and the inescapable end. To see Manannán as Mac Lir is to glimpse a deity who is not a puppet master of nature, but the spirit of transition itself. No mortal could ever fully comprehend him, not because he hid, but simply because, like the sea, he was always just beyond reach. Across early Irish poetry and myth, the sea appears again and again not as a wall, but as a shimmering veil. In some tales, Manannán is born of a wave, rising from froth and sunlight, bearing pearls in his hair and laughter on his lips. In others, he is simply always there, appearing at the horizon as a chariot rider silhouetted against endless blue, inviting sailors and dreamers alike to consider what lies just out of sight. It is no accident that so many heroes in Celtic tradition begin or end their transformations at the water's edge. Death, birth, initiation, revelation, enacted where earth and sea embrace with each tide. Manannán is the master of that embrace. He can walk the sandy threshold between known and unknown at will, ferrying souls and sages alike toward revelation or oblivion. What does it mean, then, to be the son of the sea? Not merely to command water, but to embody the proposition that every end is a beginning, that every boundary conceals a door. In truth, Manannán is not water's ruler, but its guide, the patient watcher of its ever-changing face. If you have ever stood on a stormy shore at dusk, felt small before the endless churning, sensed that what you witness is both inviting and forbidding, you have glimpsed something of Manannán's essence. He is the gentle invitation to cross and the stern warning that there is always a price. Perhaps you have your own favourite place along the water's edge, a moment where the ordinary world seemed to shimmer, where sound changed, where the salt in the air was accompanied by the faintest sense of memory or longing for you could not name. For me, it is always sunrise on a quiet beach, a time and place where yesterday and tomorrow meet. There, for an instant, I remember what it is to be curious, unafraid, and somehow outside of time. Not a bad feeling for a Tuesday morning, but as always, the magic lifts when the day begins. Manannán, however, abides. It is natural, then, that Manannán's true domain is not the surface of the ocean or any plot of earthly land, but the places in between, especially the otherworld, which breathes beneath, beyond, and alongside ordinary existence. Let us slip gently into one of his favoured retreats. Dear Narnog, the land of eternal youth, and Emane Ablach, the Isle of Apple Trees, are not just beautiful settings for myth, but living, breathing realities that invite deeper dreaming. If you have ever wondered what paradise would feel like if it blossomed from mist and music instead of stone and gold, you are in the right company. In Greek myth, the kingdom of the dead is a dark and solemn place. Hades is ruled by silence, memory, and forgetfulness, a land of shades and dust. But when the Irish imagined what comes after or what lies elsewhere, they envisioned a world awake with colour, sound, and abundance. The otherworld is a garden that never wanes, a parallel existence layered over the green hills and surge-swept coasts of Ireland. Here, trees blush with silver branches. Apples shimmer gold, and any bite satisfies both your stomach and your soul. The wind itself carries song, sweet and subtle, that weaves a peace so profound even warriors let their weapons fall. In Tia Na Nag there is no pain, no old age, no disease. To step ashore is to awaken into a perpetual dawn, where light is always soft, food is always fresh, and the company is always gentle. Time flows here in loops and eddies. Someone may spend 3 days in Manannán's halls, return to Ireland, and find that centuries have passed, their home a ruin, and their name a whisper. To mortals, this is a profound loss. To the residents of the Otherworld, it is simply a quiet fact, a different pace of living. No sorrow stains these lands. Even memories of pain gently dissolve in the lapping music. All is enchantment. The only cost is homesickness, for all that is truly precious in this world is also fleeting. Heroes crave return, to see their families and native lands, only to find time has stolen everything away. The land of promise is a reward and a test, a place so perfect you may mourn your own life for having ever been less. It is not all passivity and ease. The Otherworld can sometimes be dangerous. Its beauty lulls travellers into forgetfulness, traps laughter on silent islands, or compels mortals to turn aside from quests they once swore to complete. Manannán's domains are never quite what you expect, always layered, always a step ahead of longing. Even joy, when endless, becomes its own challenge. The wise God understands that, and so his hospitality is matched by his expectations. It is all too easy to become lost here. Sometimes all you need to do is forget what you came for, and the Otherworld will enfold you forever. But for those who can walk lightly and boldly, like Manannán himself, the Otherworld is not a trap, but a revelation. There, the boundaries of self are loosened, the music of the air brings dreams so vivid they might as well be real, and the greatest treasures are not just gold or apples, but the peace of knowing there is more to reality than mortal eyes can hold. The gods dwell among mortals, and mortals are welcome, for a time, among the gods. The boundary that is Manannán's domain becomes the gift, the in-between space where magic flourishes, and every wish is just another possibility waiting to be chosen. Have you ever wondered what flavor of immortality you would choose for yourself? Eternal youth in a golden garden, or wisdom gained by watching worlds change and fade? For me, it is the wandering, to walk that shifting border, always learning, always almost at home. Paradise is a beautiful place, but I think I would get restless. Manannán, meanwhile, manages to be perfectly at home anywhere he chooses. This, perhaps, is why the gods' treasures are not just objects. They are metaphors, tools for revealing the deeper truths about his own nature. Every artifact recorded in myth can be read as a chapter in the philosophy of the boundary, as an allegory for how magic works in a world built on doors and thresholds rather than walls. Scuab Tuin, the wave sweeper, is the very image of this philosophy. To command a vessel that needs neither sail nor oar is to command not just the sea but the journey itself, the choice to move anywhere, at any time, without resistance. This is not only a symbol of mastery, but of humility before the possibilities that boundaries provide. A ship that obeys the thoughts of its captain erases the line between intention and result. It is pure will, pure direction, yet it requires trust in the unknown. In a world where mortals fear being lost, Manannán's ship is the definition of being always found. One must wonder, dreamers, what navigation apps could learn from such a craft. The fabled cloak, the fath, is woven not of wool or silk but of mist, song, and the unsayable things that linger just out of view. To wrap oneself in such a garment is to disappear not just from sight, but from memory, from the very histories that might otherwise trap a god or a mortal in the weight of old stories. This cloak is power, yes, granting its wearer invisibility, shape-shifting, the ability to move without trace, but it also represents the necessity of boundaries. Some things must remain hidden. Some truths are gifts only to those who have earned the right to see. The god who owns such a cloak is not just a master of concealment, he is the judge of what should be revealed. Fragarak, the answerer, the sword that compels truth itself, is perhaps the most telling treasure of all. It cuts through armor, a handy trick certainly, but it also cuts through lies, delusion, and the fog of uncertainty. To threaten someone with Fragarak is to bring them, willing or not, to the center of truth, to force the boundaries of self-deception to drop away. Yet, in the hands of Manannán, this power is never simple. Truth may be necessary, but it is not always gentle. The sword is both a key and a test. Are you ready for what lies on the other side of honesty? A god who carries Fragarak is a god who demands not just respect, but the courage to stand naked before yourself. And then there are lesser-known wonders, the self-navigating boat, the magical cloak, the goblet of truth, and so many more, each a reflection of his ability to traverse, to protect, to reveal, to conceal. Together, they form the toolkit of a deity whose real genius is orchestrating transitions themselves. Honestly, which mythical tool would you find most useful in your own life? For me, it is Fragarak. Not just because I have questions for certain customer service departments, but because there is something deeply comforting in knowing truth can sometimes be summoned by will, even if only in legend. Still, I would not mind the cloak. It would be perfect for skipping out of boring meetings. But tools do not make a god any more than weapons make a hero. The true mark of Manannán's authority lies not in his possessions, but in his pupils. If you look across the brightest constellations of Irish myth, you will find his fingerprints everywhere, shaping kings and warriors, poets and magicians, guiding not just by granting power, but by forging character. Lugh, the bright star of the Tuatha De Danann, is sometimes celebrated as the greatest of the Irish gods, champion, craftsman, king. Yet it was Manannán who fostered him, who raised him on the apple-bright shores of Eman who taught him that power is nothing without wisdom and that strategy often matters more than violence. It was Manannán who reminded the young demigod that gifts should be earned, not just received. To foster is to invest in the future. To mentor is to shape the pattern of fate itself, one careful word at a time. Yet Lugh is only the most famous of Manannán's foster children. The god's tendency to adopt the promising and lost binds him to all manner of warriors and wonders. Cormac MacAir learned lessons of justice and veracity at his hands. Finn MacCumhail's son, Oisín, knew otherworldly joys because Manannán's own daughter, Niamh, chose him. Mongan MacFiachnai, raised in the mists, returned to Ireland wiser than any poet, able to recite histories and songs from worlds no one else remembered. Manannán's mentorship is not simply education, it is transformation. To be guided by Manannán is to be forever changed, to become a bridge between what was and what might yet be. In this sense, Manannán is the great cosmic strategist, the king who rarely takes the field himself but sets the pieces in motion so that all realms retain their harmony. Heroes may swing swords and win battles, but Manannán ensures that the right battles are fought for the right reasons, at the right times. Without him, the worlds would blur together too soon, the fragile balance between chaos and order lost forever. For every victory credited to a champion, there is, in the shadows, the wisdom of a hidden mentor, a god of the boundary who pointed the way. Who would you want as your own cosmic mentor? For me, the appeal of Manannán lies in his honesty about limits, the understanding that it is not about possessing or mastering everything, but about knowing what to transcend and when to let go. His advice, I am sure, would be equal parts wit, patience, and just enough riddles to keep things interesting. Which brings us finally to the heart of all these stories, the liminal god, the guardian of all thresholds, not just physical, but metaphysical, moral, and emotional. Manannán MacLír is the hinge upon which all doors swing. The dictionary will tell you that liminality means occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary. In myth, it means being the bridge wherever two worlds meet, dusk and dawn, land and sea, mortal and divine, life and legend. This is the secret of Manannán's true power, his refusal to reside anywhere but in the in-between. The shoreline, ever-changing with tide and weather, is his rightful home. The fog that drifts between a waking world and a dream is his greatest temple. The gate to the other world, sometimes open, sometimes closed, is his greatest responsibility. He is not content to simply rule a stable kingdom. He prefers to keep things moving, to keep questions unanswered until the right moment, to guide travelers to the border and then ask, "Are you ready to step through?" He is a ferryman as much as a king, patient and silent or gently teasing depending on the passenger. Souls, knowledge, heroes, and lost causes all ride the tide when Manannán beckons. If you bring arrogance, he will test you. If you bring humility, he will offer you the apple you did not know you needed. If you come for power, he will remind you that true mastery comes from embracing uncertainty. The price for passage is always the willingness to be changed. Manannán is the shaman of the Irish pantheon, the one who carries secrets but shares them only when the seeker is ready. His guardianship is not about exclusion or isolation, but about protecting the dance of transformation itself. Thresholds are made to be crossed, yes, but never lightly. There is no wisdom without the risk of loss, no magic without the courage to abandon the familiar. To stand on the cusp of knowledge and mystery, with Manannán beside you, is to understand that the world is not made of separate things, but of the shimmering, shifting space between them. Every story, every dream, every spell is just a step away from something more. As we travel further in these silent hours, let us circle into the next spiral of Manannán's mysteries, his connection to the triskelion, the three-legged symbol found carved on stone, painted on shields, and remembered as the emblem of the Isle of Man. Few images capture the philosophy of a wandering sea god quite so perfectly. At first glance, the triskelion is simple, three bent legs radiating from a single point, or sometimes three intertwining spirals. But if you look deeper, you find a universe in its shape. To the Celts, 3 was more than a number. It held the essence of balance, the dance of life, death, and rebirth, the interweaving of land, sea, and sky. The triskelion is never still. It whirls, suggesting ceaseless movement and the flow of forces within and beyond the world. It is not the sign of a static ruler, but of a lord in perpetual motion. On the Isle of Man, this symbol is inseparable from Manannán himself. He is said to cross the land in 3 strides, to circle the world in 3 days, or to appear in 3 places at once, legend being rather forgiving with numbers, so long as the story rolls along. His realm is the ever-shifting seam between realities, and so the triskelion is the perfect badge, movement without end, a god who defies definition, who forever turns the wheel of change. For the people of the island, the symbol is not a static emblem but a living force, a reminder that nothing endures except transformation. It carries a quiet warning and a hope all at once. The sea both guards and offers passage, and fortune favours those willing to move with its tide. It intrigues me to imagine what a modern traveller might make of the triskelion if they encountered it without its story. A spinning thing, all energy and purpose, but no clear destination. Yet isn't that, in the end, the shape not only of Manannán, but of every human life? We begin, we turn, we change, and we arrive, almost always elsewhere. The god who wears the triskelion teaches that to remain still is to refuse the invitation of destiny, and to move is to discover who you might become. For my part, I think I'd rather keep walking, even when the wind is against me. Stasis is by far the loneliest fate. Having circled once through symbols, let us now slip into the delightful unpredictability of Manannán as the divine trickster. Most gods have their caprices, but Manannán's methods are always more mist than malice. Some love a trickster for their chaos. Think of Loki, whose joy is destruction, or Hermes, who delights in clever theft. Manannán's games, by contrast, are more like riddles posed to a favourite student or stern lessons given with a silver laugh. His illusions are not simply entertainment or sabotage, but acts of teaching, veils to keep the unready from knowledge, tests of character, and sometimes the means by which wisdom is seeded into those who need it most. He shrouds his islands in mists, not just to confound invaders, but to ensure only the worthy find their way. He dons the garb of a serving man or a wandering bard, stepping among mortals unseen to test kindness, hospitality, or the strength of heroes' patience. He conjures visions and shifts forms, not to confuse but to awaken. For Manannán, mystery is a gift, and those who see through the fog are changed by it. You might say then that his greatest trick is not in hiding things, but in crafting moments when perception and reality collide, and something important is revealed. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many frustrations in life are but lessons in a subtle disguise. For my taste, I've always admired tricksters who leave the world a little wiser in their wake. Manannán, with his mists and markers, fits the measure. Not harsh, but certainly thorough. The gods rarely do things by halves, perhaps that is what makes their humour so enduring. A mist, after all, is not a lock, it is merely a request to look more closely. But the god who wraps islands in sea foam is also, at heart, a giver of feasts, and nowhere do we see the cycles of life and death more clearly than in the bewildering eternal banquet of the Tuatha De Danann, hosted, of course, by Manannán and his magical swine. It is easy, in the modern world, to forget the importance of a shared meal. For the Irish gods, it was nothing less than the renewal of the universe. Manannán's swine were a marvel. Each night they were slaughtered and served, rich and dripping and enough to feed every immortal hunger. Each morning they rose up again, whole and content, to feast anew. This was not mere abundance, but a living drama of sacrifice and return of death that is not truly an end, and nourishment that comes through letting go. At the table of Manannán, eternity is found not in the denial of endings, but in allowing them to be the seeds of new beginnings. The swine willingly become the feast, and the feast restores youth, vigour, and laughter to every guest. Alongside the meat comes the ale of immortality, brewed to banish decay and ennui, to fill every heart with the wild, gentle song of otherworld joy. The gods do not eat for sustenance, they eat for memory, for ritual, for the affirmation that cycles continue. In some tales, the feast is also a time for storytelling, for the sharing of secrets, for the gentle correction of pride. If you could restore one feast from legend, which would you choose? For me, I think Manannán's banquet would suit best. Not because of the endless food, though I seldom turn down a good meal, but because the real magic of his table is its promise that nothing is wasted and all things return, altered, but still loved. There's a comfort in knowing the party never truly ends, only pauses between songs. Into the golden warmth of feasts and the laughter of gods, there enters another kind of magic, the power of naming. Manannán is no mere lord of festivals and illusions, he is the shaper of destinies. In Celtic tradition, names are more than labels. They are the blueprint for fate, the architecture of a soul. To name is to create, to call forth what has not yet become. Manannán's power often takes the form of naming heroes, giving places new purpose, or bestowing fresh identities on the weary and the bold alike. One of the oldest tales tells how the hero Setanta became Cu Chulainn, the Hound of Culann, when Manannán, or sometimes another god, depending which bard you consult, gives him a new name after a fateful event. This naming is more than ceremony. It is the forging of a new purpose, a refocusing of the story itself. To be renamed is to accept a new path, a new destiny shaped by the notice of the gods. Manannán's blessings are not always easy, but they are always transformative. He names islands, hills, rivers, and mortals alike, imprinting each with a kind of magic. A memory, a hint of what might be, a challenge and a promise. It's a curious thing, the power of names. Which would you rather, to choose your own, or to be named by a power who has seen farther into your soul than you yourself ever could? Personally, I value the ones we earn in laughter and in trouble. The stories of Manannán suggest that, either way, you'll end up as someone different than you expected. It's all in how you grow into the name. Finally, as our journey with Manannán draws to twilight, let us settle into the hush of legacy, for even gods, especially those as elusive as he, cannot escape change. With the march of new faiths and new ages, Manannán was not forgotten, he was transformed. As Christianity swept across Ireland and beyond, the old gods faded from temples but not from memory. Manannán, too slippery for erasure, shifted into folk legend. He became a wizard, a wise king of the fairies, or the caped figure glimpsed through morning mists along the shore. On the Isle of Man, tales linger of mysterious visitors wrapped in grey, of voices calling through the fog, of treasures guarded by one who asks a riddle before opening the way. In some stories he remains a champion of the downtrodden, the guardian of secrets, the founder of feasts and dances that keep the old magic alive. Isn't it remarkable how the truest gods become both less and more over time? A god who outlasts his own worship becomes a part of the land, the weather, the customs, and the quiet certainties that tie a people to their place. Manannán's greatest magic may be this: to endure not by force but by dancing at the edges, never quite conscious, but never truly gone. To be the mist on the water and the wheel that never stops turning, a presence that outlasts memory and doctrine alike. The triskelion, after all, promises that nothing is ever truly lost so long as things are turning, learning, and returning. So, dear dreamers, as you drift toward your own borderlands, may you find Manannán's blessings in every threshold you cross. The courage to move when the moment comes, the wit to learn from a joke before it stings, the comfort that nothing is wasted, and every end brings its own new beginning. May your dreams tonight be filled with laughter, transformation, and the quiet safety that comes from knowing the wheel will always turn again. Let the waves carry us onward, dreamers, for there is always further to drift in the story of Manannán mac Lir. When you think you have reached the horizon of his myth, you discover another tide, another current drawing you out toward new meanings and deeper mysteries. We could spend 1,000 nights exploring the ways his story weaves through history and imagination alike, and still, each telling would reveal another layer, another secret waiting just beneath the surface. Return with me to the triskelion, the emblem not just of the Isle of Man, but of all things born in motion. To picture those 3 turning legs or swirling spirals is to meditate on the nature of time itself. Our ancestors drew spirals not merely as decoration, but as reminders. Every turning is at once a departure and a return. In Manannán, that truth comes to life. He is not only a god who moves, but a god who returns and renews, whose stories are told and retold with variations and surprises, almost as if he delights in never being pinned down to one meaning. The ancients believed that motion is the signature of the divine. Manannán moves, therefore he is. And in a world that often values certainty and stability, his relentless turning is a lesson and a blessing. I sometimes wonder, what would it feel like to be steady while the world whirls around you? Does the god at the center of the triskelion know stillness, or only the peace to be found while moving in rhythm with the wider cosmos? For mortals, stasis always brings loss. Everything changes, except for the truth that everything must change. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of the triskelion and its master. Find your footing in the flow, for nothing is meant to stand still forever. And if you walk with grace, like Manannán, you may discover that every cycle brings you secretly, often delightfully, to the place you most need to be. Think, too, on the image of Manannán striding the land in 3 great steps. Each stride is more than a display of power. It is a bridge between realms, a visible promise that the god belongs to all 3, earth, sea, and sky, without being mastered by any. He is comfortable in each domain, but owned by none, always carrying the energies of each into the next, so that the boundaries themselves become places of welcome and of possibility. The ancient festivals of the Isle of Man, where villagers dressed as sea kings or paraded symbols of the triskelion, were more than pageants. They were a way of inviting Manannán's presence, asking for his guidance, not just across the water, but across every season of life. Circle back for a moment to the divine trickster, Manannán, the god of mists and illusions. In lore after lore, he moves less by violence than by bewilderment, changing the way men see the world rather than altering the world itself. The fog he spreads over the Isle of Man is the most famous, but it is only the most visible of his many veils. Sailors lost in mist, heroes set upon wild quests, kings tested by mysterious visitors. They are all swept up in lessons of humility and perception. Sometimes the only way to become wise is to be lost, to wander not by landmarks but by questions. And yet, no tale of the god's trickery ever ends with ruin. His mists lift, his riddles resolve, and those who meet him, if they survive the confusion, are more themselves than before. It is as though every joke is an invitation to see the world with fresh eyes, every test a puzzle whose answer is the hero's own becoming. One favourite story of mine is the pursuit of the Gila de Care, a seemingly troublesome giant, actually Manannán in disguise, who leads the Fianna through wild adventures, forcing them to cooperate, to rely on wits and loyalty, and to discover new strengths. There is always a reason for the confusion. There is always a gift hidden within the test. If the gods laugh at mortals, it is rarely with cruelty, and always with the patience of those who know that all learning begins in not knowing. If you had the power to wrap the world in fog for just a day, what would you conceal and what would you reveal? For myself, I think of answers. I would hide to see what new questions the world might ask. Manannán's world is one in constant flux, and he reminds us that sometimes the best way to find the path is to enjoy not seeing it for a little while. Beyond tricks and riddles lies the hearth, the feast, and its promise of renewal. The endless banquet of the Tuatha de Danann is not only a marvel for the tongue and the belly, but for the soul. To see the divine swine rise anew each morning is to remember that sacrifice and plenty need not be opposites. The feast would not be possible without loss, but in the otherworld every loss is met with a gentle return, every ending with a beginning. It is a feast for the senses as much as the stomach. Voices rising in song, laughter echoing like the tide on a distant shore, the sweet, earthy steam of roasted meat, the bright spice of apples and honey, the golden foam of ale of immortality. It is a celebration of being alive in every possible way. The gods feast not because they are hungry, but because the act itself is holy, a pattern of gratitude and joy, a memory that what is given will always in time be given again. For mortals, the invitation is always open. To feast is to join a cycle older than death, a time outside of loss. That, perhaps, is why so many Irish tales close with feasting, or begin with it. It is not just indulgence, but the ritual return to hope. Good night, dreamers.